Okay, thank you, everyone. We're going to get started. I suspect people will roll in a little bit. This is the October 10th meeting of the SAU41 governing school board. That's the collection of the 3 district school boards. Starting the meeting at 6:03. Going to start things off with introductions. Please state your name and go a little slow for those of us who are poor at comprehension.
And mention your board that you're on as well for the public.
You're going too fast. I was going to say that. I'm trying to be slow, Carol. So we've got a packed agenda, but a very special event tonight that I'm looking forward to, and I hope you are as well. My name is Tom Solon. I'm on the Co-op School Board.
Carol Roy, Hollis School Board.
Gina Bertzog, Assistant Superintendent.
Colleen Hickman, Brookline School Board.
Tracy Ferry, Brookline School Board.
Johanna Schreiber-Halligan, Brookline School Board. Jennifer Mann, Hollis School Board.
Raphael Zach, Hollis School Board.
Kate Stoll, Co-op School Board.
Krista Whalen, Co-op School Board.
Cindy Van Kona, Co-op School Board.
Holly Durlow-Babcock, Co-op School Board.
Amy Kellner, Hollis School Board.
Thank you very much.
And we also have
Beth Williams, Co-op School Board.
Thank you. Do you want to slide these down so that you can get go over to Cindy's corner? Okay, thank you. Starting with the agenda, the first item is appointment of process observer. Does anyone want to volunteer? Because if not, I have my favorites. Krista, would you mind? Here's the reason I do that. You're very observant and you give excellent feedback.
Thank you for the compliment, and I see right through it.
Well, I was actually hoping that Rob would be here because he does a lot of complaining. But since he's not here,
All right.
yet. Okay, notifications of nominations, resignations, or correspondence. Do we have any?
We have none.
We have none. Wow. Approval of minutes. So we have minutes from our last meeting, which was on May 9th, 2024. It was the organizational meeting. Wow, man, he just missed it.
Just missed appointment.
There's reappointment, that's always good.
Rob Mann has just arrived at 6:05. So I'd like a motion to approve the meeting minutes from our organizational meeting on May 9th with the following amendments offered. Page 7, line 48, replace call with cost. And members Roy and Kellner were not at that meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Krista Whalen,
Second.
second by Cindy Van Conant. Any other comments about the minutes? Seeing none, I'm gonna default to polling the whole group on a vote. If there are no votes, then we will go to voting by district. So, all those in favor?
Sorry, I had my hand up, but I thought you were done.
Opposed? Abstentions? 2 abstentions. Okay. Thank you very much. And we also have non-public minutes from that same meeting on May 9th. Again, same situation. Can I have a motion to approve the non-public minutes?
So moved.
Moved by Krista,
Second.
second by Cindy. Any further discussion or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? 2 abstentions. Great, thank you. Now we get to the fun stuff. It's a little early. Is that a problem? Okay.
Not at all.
So tonight we have a very special guest. Barrett Christina is the executive director of the New Hampshire School Board Association. He was hired in 2005. Boy, right out of grammar school. He has served as the association's staff attorney, director of governmental relations, chief trainer, and associate executive director before being appointed executive director in 2017. We've seen him in a lot of those roles here in SAU41, and he has been extremely valuable to us in all of those situations. In his years at NHSBA, Barrett has provided training to thousands of school board members. He's testified at dozens of bills before the New Hampshire legislature, and testifying before a legislature is not the same as lobbying. It's actually a different process. He's drafted many pieces of legislation and has provided school board members and school administrators with legal guidance, training, and support on all matters relative to school board governance. Tonight we've invited him here specifically to talk about and help us with understanding our roles as school board members and our interaction with the community. But he did provide for us an overview of some other training that he does on general roles and responsibilities. If you haven't had a chance to look through that, I encourage you to do so when you have some time to really focus on it. There's some incredible information, and I've been doing this for longer than I care to admit, and I was reminded and saw some new information that I didn't really grasp at a prior occurrence. So I encourage you to do that. At this time, I'd like to invite Barrett to come speak with us. If you want to come up here, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, if that works, if their
Yeah.
mic is available.
Absolutely.
Yep, and first he's going to give us a little bit of an introduction and overview of NHSBA, and then we're going to move into a question and answer kind of format. I have some initial questions that I've generated, but this is also a meeting for all of you, so we will also welcome questions and discussion with the board as a whole. Barrett, I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Great. Thank you very much, Tom, for that nice introduction. Good evening, everyone. Some familiar faces and names around the table that I've worked with in SAU41 previously. Rob, good seeing you again. And some new names that I haven't necessarily specifically worked with. Is that a board member waiting to come in?
It looks like a little kid.
It does look like a little kid. What if he needs to use the restroom? But anyway, so I appreciate the invitation to come down to SAU41 to sort of give this presentation and meet some of you. I hope most of you know who NHSBA is and what we do, and you receive our emails about our legislative updates and our webinars and other events going on and breaking news and policy updates and things of that nature. So if I just a minute or two about NHSBA and who we are and what we do. We're a private nonprofit organization. Some people, often members of the public or some new school board members, might think that we're like a branch or an arm of the Department of Education, and we're not. We'll get calls from just constituents that have a concern about their superintendent or their school board and try and navigate them through the process. But in fact, we're a private nonprofit organization. We have a board of directors who is, per our bylaws, they are all sitting school board members across the state from any of the various 5 regions. And we have a staff of 4, myself as staff attorney, staff attorney, that was the easier job. Myself as executive director. We do have a staff attorney who does our policy and legal work. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. We have a director of governmental relations, Becky Wilson, who is our key liaison with the New Hampshire legislature, the Department of Education, and some of the other education nonprofit organizations such as the School Administrators Association, Principals Association, Teachers Union, so on and so forth. And then Amanda Aldis, our operations manager, who makes the world go round. And if she was not with us, we'd have to close shop. We really would without Amanda's help. So the key services that we provide, and Tom kind of mentioned them when he was sort of running through my resume. Our staff attorney answers legal questions from school board members and school administrators, primarily superintendents, and with a caveat with our legal services that we provide, we are not in a position or in a place to supplant the local legal counsel that you get. I know Jim O'Shaughnessy does some work down here. I think Tom Clausen used to do some work for you. If Tom still does some work, and Will Phillips, actually, our staff attorney, I know has done some work within SAU41 as well too. Attended some annual meetings, I believe, for I forget exactly what district within the SAU. But so we're there sort of as sort of the first stop. Superintendent will call, or a school board chair will call and say, can we go into non-public session for this? And we'll, kind of give them an idea, point them in the right direction of the statute. Anything that we think is sort of too in the weeds or too in the nitty gritty or has the potential to lead to litigation, we'll often pass that off to local counsel. We'll say, you got to call your private attorney about this, because they're the ones that are going to be representing the board and whatever entanglement may follow. The other key aspect is our policy services. We hope the boards and the board members see the sample policies that we send out 2 or 3 times a year. The most recent one went out maybe 2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken. And our staff attorney does all of those as well too. We provide, the sample policies and the templates and the sort of the boilerplate language, and then send them out and encourage local boards to review them and make necessary changes to fit the needs of your own local district. We're a statewide organization. We certainly recognize that policy needs in Hollis or Brookline or within the co-op may be different than Manchester, and may be different than the policy needs in, say, Colebrook up north, for example. So those are the two primary services that our staff attorney provides: the legal assistance and the policy work. Becky Wilson is our director of governmental relations. Becky is the educator on staff. Becky has multiple certifications from the Department of Education. She's a certified superintendent, and before coming to NHSBA about 4 or 5 years ago, was a SAU level special ed director in Hopkinton, and has spent 25 years in both building level, SAU level, providing special ed services. And then myself as staff attorney, I kind of manage the association, and Becky's work, as I said, working with the legislature, working with other stakeholder groups to provide NHSBA's voice at various meetings, conferences, workshops. And I guess the primary service that NHSBA provides, and that I'm most proud of, and the one that I enjoy the most, is trainings just like this. We do a number of webinars. We do probably 15 to 20 webinars every year. We do about 7 or 8 in what I'll just call the fall, and then we do another 7 or 8, if not more, following March elections. We kind of take the January and February off, recognizing that people are gearing up for annual meetings and finishing up your collective bargaining and budget hearings and things of that nature, and then obviously just a natural turnover on school boards at March elections. So, but in addition to the 15 or 20 webinars that we do and that we provide, we do, between my staff attorney and I, we are out probably doing 80 or 90 of these trainings a year, mostly in the fall, and then obviously following March elections as well too. A school board might have you might have complete turnover within 1 or 2 election cycles, so we'll go out and do sort of roles and responsibilities training, comparing and contrasting the roles of the school board versus those of the superintendent, and then hopefully finding that middle ground, and what we call kind of best practices, if you will. So yeah, I'm out. We do this, and it's not just the roles and responsibilities training. We do individual right to know law training. I was up north a couple weeks ago, providing some information to their school board about school choice options. They're looking at They have a tuition contract that expires in a couple years, so they're looking at various options. Right to know law, effective meetings is another big one. But I enjoy this part of my job the most, to be quite honest with you. It's not dealing with the legislature, which is its own benefit. But I like coming out to the small towns in New Hampshire that I would never ever have another chance or an opportunity or reason to go to, and coming to little, I think this is an elementary school, right? And little elementary schools, and meeting my members where they are and hearing their concerns and answering their questions. So. That's a little bit about NHSBA and sort of what we do and why we do it and how we operate. There's more information on our website. If anybody has any questions about sort of the governance structure of NHSBA or what we do or how we operate, by all means, give me a call or shoot me an email. I'm happy to do a little bit of a deeper dive in that for you. Moving on to sort of tonight, before I get into the sort of the materials itself and open it up for Q&A, my goal whenever I'm doing a training is to have a conversation with the school board. I'm not here to dictate. I'm not here to tell you this is how you have to do your job and this is how you be a school board member and these are the only best practices that there can be. I totally understand that there are nuance, history, tradition, local customs in every school board and every community across the state. You also recognize that I'm not using any technology tonight, right? I find when I'm working on a PowerPoint, what's everybody doing? They're staring at the screen and not necessarily taking in or listening to what I'm trying to convey. So when I'm doing a training for a local school board, I don't use technology. I don't use a PowerPoint or anything. We're going to sit and have a conversation, and hopefully I can answer some of your questions and hopefully provide some guidance for the 17 of you, if I'm not mistaken, however many total on the three boards moving forward. So with that, again, I want this to have a conversation. Let's ask questions. Let's let it be interactive, if you will. Me reading from slides or reading a handout doesn't do any good, but you asking me the questions, is going to be a more efficient use of your time. So I know Tom had some questions that he sort of wanted to run through. We're going to open it up to everybody, obviously. But before we get to the questions, I'm going to do like 5 minutes on school board roles and responsibilities. We've got a packet here. I forget how 50, 60 pages or whatever it might be. I only printed off myself, I don't know, the first 13 or so pages. I don't expect you to read everything in there, but the first 13 to 15 pages or so is the primary training docs that NHSBA uses for our roles and responsibilities training when we're doing either the webinars for a new school board member orientation in April or May, or going out to school boards like this and having the same conversation. And the remainder of them, the last, I think, 40, 50 pages or so, are just a handful of articles about best practices, positive school board superintendent relationships, 7 habits of highly effective school boards, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to give literally a quick 5-minute primer on sort of school board roles and responsibilities without going through all the slides and without going through the 13 pages of materials. The version that I sent out, we've been using this version for probably, 6 or 7 years now, maybe a little bit longer. We always tweak it. This may not, I think this is the latest version. If not, there may be a couple nuanced changes that are not, necessarily important for the purpose of tonight's discussion, more just probably formatting and things of that nature. But when we were putting together our roles and responsibilities training in this document, initially, again, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we went through all the various statutes and Department of Education rules that talk about school board governance and school board responsibilities. And we were able to sort of put those in about 7 or 8 buckets, if you will, topics, headings, if you will. And some of them you deal with probably every single meeting or every single day as a school board or as an individual school board member. And then some of them probably not that frequently. For example, we have got a section in there about if you have to have a hearing for either a student discipline matter or a staff discipline matter. I imagine, in in the K through 8 or the K through 6 school, you're probably not dealing with student discipline a lot. You're not suspending kids. Maybe more so in the middle school, maybe a little bit more so in the high school. But so the primary roles and responsibilities, I'm just gonna list them off. But I wanted to mention those because they kind of set the stage for the questions and conversation that we're going to be having moving forward. Okay, the first primary role and responsibility of school boards is policy making. You are a policy making board, and anytime a legislative body, and that's essentially what you are. You're not like the New Hampshire legislature, but you're acting in the same capacity, right? The legislature passes laws and statutes. What do school boards adopt? Your policies, right? And your policies are what? They're the rules of the school district. And we know policies are important for a variety of reasons. One, we've got a handful of statutes and Department of Education rules that say the school board shall adopt a policy on X. There are about 75 or so that are required by both state and federal law. Excuse me. Most of those are in state law. Many of them are in state statutes. Even more are within Department of Education administrative rules and administrative regulations. But why is policy so important? When I say school board policy, who do you naturally think of? If I say who do school board policies impact and affect, you're immediately going to think of what? Staff and students, right? And to some degree that makes sense. But I take it you've all seen your policy manual. We've got the 8 or 9 sections, A through K or L, whatever it is. Section B. What does Section B relate to? School board operations. You've got policies that govern yourself, right? During COVID, did we have to change our visitor to school policies and regulations? Yes, right? You got to check in, you got to have a mask. I've been in some districts where I have to show my driver's license and they scan that. So it's not just staff and students. Who is it? It's visitors to school, which could be the community at large, right? You've got the holiday concert. It's open, I presume, to everybody in town. I presume, again, without specifically knowing, that you have a policy about renting out facilities within the school district, right? The gymnasium or the garden club wants to rent space on a Saturday morning, right? So you've got policies that impact that. So your policies are not just staff and students. You've got policies impacting the board itself. You've got policies sort of directed towards parents and expectations for parents and their children. And then you've got policies that impact the community at large. So that's why policy work is so important. Second primary role and responsibility, fiscal oversight. I'd say establish the budget. That's a little bit of a misnomer. Some communities have municipal budget committees where the MVC is the one that proposes the budget to the voters, and that's what they vote on. But even outside of sort of budget development, and even if you do have a municipal budget committee or a BudCom under the co-op statute, the school board still has budgetary obligations to put together a proposed budget, provide documents to the budget committee, and then after the March meeting, the budget's set. It's not like it just goes away. I imagine every meeting your boards are dealing with some level of fiscal oversight, right? You're getting reports from the business administrator either every meeting or every month or however that's done. From time to time, the board is obligated to take action to move money across line items. Right? I don't know if different boards have different practices for that. The classic example is that you budgeted to have to plow the driveway 10 times, but it snowed 20 times this year. It was a big winter. Or another common reason is you had a child move in with significant special education needs and maybe an out-of-district placement that is going to cost the district $1,000 a day at a facility in Massachusetts or whatnot, but you didn't budget that, so you've got to find money elsewhere and transfer line items. We've got approval of manifests, so there's always continual fiscal oversight. Budget policy. Third, hire and evaluate the superintendent. I'm aware of the transition that is starting to sort of take place and unfold here in SAU41, and I think I just met Gina about a month ago for the first time at the South Central meeting in Pinkerton. So certainly look forward to working with her. I know Tom will be in her ear to call NHSBA regularly when she steps into the new role. So, well, seriously, I mean, I say that halfway jokingly, but you know, I take special interest in new superintendents because I want them to succeed, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's going to be different. I have no doubt that Gina is highly capable and highly qualified, and the board has made the proper, you know, the right decision, but it's still going to be new, right? And so we, you know, I tell new superintendents all the time, reach out, even if you think you know the answer, if you need some cover, you know, call me or call my staff attorney. But anyway, the back end of that is evaluating the superintendent. There are 3 sources of law in which that you're obligated to evaluate the superintendent. The first is a Department of Education rule, 303.01, like K or L or something like that, says the superintendent shall be evaluated on an annual basis. The second source of law, again, getting back to the first thing I talked about, you probably have a policy that says you'll evaluate the superintendent on an annual basis. And third, I haven't seen every superintendent's contract in the state, but everyone I've ever seen has a provision that says that the superintendent will be evaluated on an annual basis, and I presume Andy's contract has a similar provision. I tell boards to be mindful of that. Excuse me. One, you know, it just as a matter, I mean, aside from it being a requirement, I think it's good practice. I think every employee should be evaluated to know how they're doing and where they are and what are the expectations and what are the goals and whatnot. And two, I often, you know, somewhat joke, you know, a lot of boards, and I know it's a challenge for school boards. We deal with a lot of school boards that are calling us and saying, do you have any tips and recommendations for the evaluation process? And, you know, I've got 10 templates on file that I can give you, but I often say there's no magic bullet template that's just I can put in front of you that you're going to be able to use. In my experience, a lot of the evaluation processes are developed locally, recognizing that local districts and local boards are going to have their own desires of what they're evaluating their superintendent on. In a multi-district SAU, it's very different than in a single district SAU because the 3 boards may have 3 different goals and aspirations and what they want seen and done.
Have you been watching our meetings?
What's that?
Have you been watching our meetings?
No. But, you know, a first-year superintendent next year, you know, as a first-year superintendent is going to be evaluated differently than a superintendent that's been in the district for 10 or 15 years.
We do have 2 separate, we have a long form version and a short form
good.
version for that purpose. We're actually going to be discussing those policies after a little bit later tonight.
Fantastic. Great. Wonderful. Glad to hear that. I'll get off
Gotta
that
get
then.
ready for Gina.
So I'll move on. I'll move on from that. Getting into some of the more, I don't want to call them ancillary, but the roles and responsibilities that are not sort of the day-to-day type of things that school boards necessarily encounter. Collective bargaining. I don't know if you're doing any bargaining this year. You are. So, you know, you've got to collectively bargain, you know, from time to time, you know, whenever the contract is up.
We circulate between the 3. So this year is Hollis. Next
Nice.
year
Always
is
someone.
Brookline.
Always.
Right, every
Following
year
year's
you're
co-op.
doing one.
Every
Yeah.
year.
We have a
Yeah.
support
That's
staff.
Correct.
in a 3-district
Correct.
SAU. That's about as good as you can ask for, right? You know, better than, you know, I know, you know, some of the larger Concord, for example, and I presume Manchester's like this too. They've got like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 collective bargaining, you know, units. Their bus drivers are one, the custodians are one, the food service workers are one, the paraprofessionals are one, the administrators are one, the teachers are one. So at any given year, they're doing 2 or 3 at any given year, which sounds rough. Another sort of ancillary one, and this is going to tie in a little bit to some of the discussion that we move into tonight, is communications with your constituents, and that can take on a lot of different forms, right? Some boards are active on social media. Other boards are not, and that's fine. I don't have a specific opinion one way or the other on that. You know, most communication these days is digital, right? We're not sending notes home in kids' backpacks anymore, right? And you know, most, but and I presume you got the standard stuff. You know, you got the robocalls for, you know, snow days, and maybe a text messaging, which I'm call for an early dismissal or whatever it might be, emails and things of that nature. But we do recommend that school boards develop what I'll call a communications plan. And that doesn't necessarily mean, when we say communication plans, a lot of districts simply interpret that as like crisis communication, right? Okay, there's an active shooter, there's a fire, there's a, whatever, the tree fell down, is blocking the driveway. The communication plans can take on a lot of different forms, and we might have some templates at the office. I know we've done a couple webinars on this before, but who is going to be the spokesperson for the school board when the press calls, right? Who has authority to speak on behalf of the board when there is a crisis, or when you're hiring a new superintendent, or, are you going to hire a PR firm who's writing press releases to, if something comes up, or whatever it might be. So, communicating with your constituents obviously is an important aspect as well too. So I hit policy, I hit budget, I hit hire and evaluate the superintendent. I hit the hearings, hit collective bargaining, hit communication with the public. 2 or 3 more just quick things, if you'll indulge me just for another minute. Strategic planning as well too is a semi-requirement by law. The specific law says that the board shall develop long-range plans and identify measurable and attainable short-term objectives. I interpret that as being as developing a strategic plan. Some boards do strategic plans, other boards will just do sort of annual goal setting. Some boards do a little bit of both. So when I say strategic planning, that can take on a lot of different forms. It doesn't have to be a 50-page document that you've had 5 committees working on, and everybody involved. Some boards do that. Some boards just do sort of annual goal setting for themselves, for the district, and for the superintendent as well too. 2 quick, two quick sort of what I'll call, so where I'm looking for. Overarching governance aspects, I think, is the best way to put it, that we try to impart to our school boards. The first is that no individual school board member has any particular right to act on behalf of the board as an individual, right? When can the board act? When the 5 or 7 of you are at a duly called meeting under the right to know law, and you debate, discuss, deliberate, and ultimately vote on a particular action, adopting a policy, adopting a budget, making an expenditure, hiring a superintendent at the SAU level, whatever it might be. But throughout all the entire laws, 1,500 pages of laws governing school districts and school boards and superintendents, they all talk about the board as a collective entity and not an individual school board member. So be mindful of that when you've got an issue that may, you get an email or a phone call and you're sort of trying to contemplate how to necessarily address it with a constituent or whatever it might be. The second aspect is that it is not the role of the school board to run the schools, but rather to see that they are run well. And how do you ensure that the school district is running well? Through your policies, through your goal setting and evaluation with your superintendent, through your fiscal oversight. All the things that we talked about, the primary roles and responsibilities: budget, policy, evaluate your superintendent, communicate with your constituents, collectively bargain. That's how you ensure that the school district is running well. So thank you for indulging me on that. I kind of wanted to set the stage a little bit before we get into some of the Q&A, but are there any questions about any of that before I sort of pass it over? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say thank you for being here. It's really, really helpful. I had a couple questions in terms of us as board members, how we can best interact and kind of use our membership on an individual level.
Yep.
And as a board. If you could talk a little bit about policy versus procedure, a little bit about, and the other big one is communication as board members. I
Yep.
think we've struggled to figure out how best to communicate with one another so that we don't accidentally form a quorum or,
Yeah. Yep.
a little bit maybe about the culture of boards. Sorry.
Yeah, depends on, and that depends on the community that I'm in at any given night.
And then I wrote down constituent for some reason, and
Yeah,
I
sure.
think we're gonna touch on
I
some
think
of
a
these.
lot of that,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So no, these are good, very good prompts, Tracy.
Right.
Yeah.
So policy versus procedure. Procedures are, depending on the school board, procedures so the board adopts a policy, right? And depending on how prescriptive the law will be, the law that requires that policy, it may require procedures, internal procedures on how to implement that policy. The example that I give, I think the clearest example that I could give on that would be there's a requirement under Department of Education rules that the school board have a policy relative to medication in schools, right? We know kids, a lot of kids are on medicine these days. So we have the policy, it directs the superintendent to do that, it directs the school nurse to do this, that, or the other thing. But your internal policies, how the school nurse stores those, who has access to the key, those are going to be internal procedures that are generally written by the administration. Why? Because the school nurse is going to know what the requirements are relative for storing the medicine. And I mean, we may have a healthcare professional on the board, but an average school board member is not going to know what those procedures are for locking them up, who has access. Do you have more than one school nurse? What's going to happen in the event that the school nurse is absent that day? Is it the principal? We got to bring in a per diem that's got a medical background? Those are going to be internal procedures that usually are developed by the administration. A good example would be, technology based, right? So first day of school, the kids are all assigned an iPad or a device of some sort, right? And so that's got to be tracked, and they're scanning with the barcode, so we know that Johnny has, barcode XYZ123 on his laptop or his device. Those sort of, when the internal procedures tend to be things that are highly specific and or highly technical, where you need that subject matter expert, your IT guy, your school nurse, perhaps in the business office, with sort of the accounting and the financial control, internal controls, tend to be left to the administration to develop. Some boards I know have required those be adopted by the board. I'm not crazy about that practice, because if you don't adopt them, then what? We don't have any procedures. And the reality is the superintendent, you got to make payroll, you got to pay the bills, so you got to move forward and pay the bills anyway. So,
I think for us, most of the time, the board only deals with procedures when they're policies about what the board does.
Yes, right. The board can, right, so rules of order, for example. You can develop your own rules of order, which are to some degree procedural. I will say some laws that have been enacted, I'd say the last 15 years, the legislature is getting very, very specific about what the policy has to include. The two that come to mind immediately are the bullying policy, which enacted in 2010, 2011. And that law, that lays out what the policy has to be. So our sample policy on the bullying law, it's very prescriptive, but that's because that's what the law requires. I think another one, I'd have to go back and check this law. You're probably familiar with the restraint and seclusion policy. Mm-hmm. I think there were some legislative changes to that. Two sessions ago, if I'm not mistaken. Again, the law is very prescriptive on what you have to do, and 10 days for this, and 20 days for that, and who you have to report to. So there are going to be some examples where the policy is procedure heavy, but that's because that's what the statute or the law requires. To your second question about how can how can the board communicate with each other in a more effective manner without violating the right to know law? I tend to say that efficiency and transparency are different sides of the same coin. We have an obligation to be as transparent as possible, public records, public meetings, very limited circumstances in which you can go into a non-public session. That does limit the ability of a quorum of you to just send off a text or an email and say, you know, can we do with this at tomorrow night's meeting? We do a lot of trainings, and there might be on our website. If not, Gina or Tom, or certainly feel free to email me yourself. I can get you. I can send you the training doc that we use on school board use of electronic communications and the pitfalls that come with that. You know, the simple answer is that a quorum of you cannot communicate outside of a meeting about official school district business. There are some exceptions, chance, social encounters. You know, if three of you, you know, you've got kids all the same grade and you're at the same Little League game, you know, that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, just be mindful of what you're talking about, you know what I mean? You know, it's not like somebody's got to stand in left field, somebody's got to stand in right field, somebody can stand behind home plate. That's not, that's not what the law was, you know, intended to do. You know, you know-
Sorry, just one other thing about that. I was also just wondering about like IT tools or collaborative, you know, are we allowed to collaborate on documents together and have them
Yeah.
open? Like, that's really,
This will, so I want to give the answer, the right answer here, knowing I'm being recorded.
Speaking of electronic.
That has not been litigated, but the couple of attorneys, I know our staff, if you were to call my staff attorney, he would say you probably cannot do that. Because you have a quorum of potentially a quorum of a board I'm discussing in quotation marks official school district business outside of a meeting. So, yeah, I know some boards have tried that, have done that. And we've also spoken with some of the attorneys. We have a sister organization called the New Hampshire Municipal Association. We work with school districts, they work with towns and cities. Their attorneys, one of their attorneys anyway, and our staff attorney, I think the three of us talked about this one time, or maybe just the two of them did, and they came down with the opinion that it would be improper for more than a quorum of a board to be working on the same Google document. So, you know, other ways, you know, to do some level of efficiency, if you will. You know, I don't know if some boards or some board chairs like maybe send out like a weekly or a bi-weekly, you know, newsletter to the rest of the board. I had conversations with the superintendent. These are the three things that came up this week, things of that nature. How often do the boards meet? Every other week, or the
Once a
Most
month.
Once a month.
boards meet once a month.
Okay, once a month. So, you know, maybe on sort of that off 2 weeks, there's just an update from a board chair or a superintendent. You got to be mindful about the cross communication and reply all.
I think
things of that
generally
nature.
most of the times come from administration, either the superintendent for SAU-wide stuff,
Yep.
or building administrators
Principal for district level stuff.
district-specific things.
Yep.
But usually it's been with the recommendation of do not reply all.
Yeah, exactly.
can't you BCC? Sorry. Can't you BCC?
Yeah, you can
and then
BCC.
You can't have a reply.
Because what the challenge with that with the electronic communication. So 5-member school board. All right, here's the example I always give, and you can use email for what I'll call ministerial stuff. The superintendent can send out an email saying attaches the agenda and a draft, you know, of a document that we're going to be reviewing. Likewise, the board chair can email the rest of the board and say something came up, we need to have a meeting on the off week, is everybody available next Tuesday at 6:00? And so you can write back, yes, I'm free, no, I'm not free. That's fine. They're public records, but you're not debating or discussing or voting or acting on official school district business. What was the question?
BCCing?
BCC. So so here's the example that I always give. Superintendent sends out an email and says, and I know everything's on like Google Drives and board docs and whatnot, so just play along with me a little bit. Superintendent sends out an email that says attaches the agenda and a draft of a contract that we will be reviewing at next week's meeting, and she just copies everybody or puts everybody in the send line, right? So Tom gets it, you know, at 8:00 that night and writes back, reply all, looks good to me, thanks. You reply back a half hour later. I made some amendments to paragraph 2. I wasn't crazy about that. I'm going to pick on Rob because I know his name. And Rob replies back a half hour later and says, there's no way in hell I'm voting for this contract. This is the worst thing ever. Right? What is going on? You've got... You got... Did I peg you on there? So, anyway, so you see my point that you've got a quorum of a school board discussing official school district business outside of a duly called meeting. It's in violation of the right to know law. What do we have to do to have a meeting? You gotta post it, right? Public needs to be available, and you gotta write minutes afterwards. So if you BCC and you hit reply all, it's not going to everybody then. So that is one safeguard, yes. But in terms of the board discussing board stuff,
Yeah.
you can't.
Yeah, no, it just trying to find some middle ground
Yeah.
where I feel like I could reach out to them and say, hey, I've got this document or this or that, you know, could you
right.
look it over? Could you review it?
Right.
Or, what, you know, just
Right.
something where I'm not feeling so.
Paranoid about. Yeah, no, I understand.
But,
I understand.
but I guess my concern with that scenario is you BCC, you get input from all your board members, but they aren't communicating with each other. You make changes and you say, okay, based on the input I've got, here's the new version. Isn't that
Yeah.
similar to having a
Discussion.
meeting?
It's probably on the line. It's probably
So-
probably getting there.
It's one thing to say, this is what we're gonna be discussing, review it, and come to the meeting with your comments,
Right.
but to try, we've tried it, to try and actually
Yeah.
get the work done.
One way that different boards do this differently. How much work is done via committee on your respective boards? Like, so I know.
Policy is done by committee.
Yeah.
Other things are, we don't have many standing committees for
Okay.
other things.
Policy, facilities.
Facility,
Yeah.
Facilities, instructional practices,
Yeah.
But the,
enrollment.
stipends.
but the those committees aren't really with board members, are those are,
Yeah, they are.
well, they
And
have,
we
but,
have 3
but,
different boards here too.
but they're
so-
not primarily, I mean, the boards make sure not to have a quorum on it.
Right, right. We don't have
Correct.
quorums on the committees. We purposely don't have quorums on committees.
Who created the committee?
The
board.
The board.
It doesn't matter. The quorum is the number of people that you've appointed to the committee.
Right, we don't appoint
Yeah.
a quorum.
Right, okay, that's right,
Right.
It's
right, so
usually-
you've got 1 or 2 board members on.
Right.
Anyway, my point being is
Usually a
how can,
single
how can boards, sort of keep on track of some of these things in between meetings and whatnot? I know a lot of boards that do a lot of work by committee, and the board meetings are, a good portion of their board meetings is the board coming in, getting a report from the committee and then ratifying or approving the committee's recommendation.
And for certain committees, do you need, or would you ask for a representative from the community, or could it just be 2 board
The
members?
board can appoint whoever it wants to a committee. I imagine your policy committees have an administrator on them, right? Either the
Yep.
Andy or the building principal or Gina. The facilities committee, I mean, I don't know if you got somebody in town that knows this stuff and likes to, put them on. I've seen some policy committees have, there was, I forget what board it was, there was a a former school board member. I think she was an English teacher, so she liked to write. And so she was on her when she was on the board, she was on her policy committee for 6 or 8 years, did 2 or 3 terms on her board. She decided not to run again, but she said, I really like the policy work, and so they agreed to keep her as a member of the public, now on the policy committee. Excuse me. Because she was good at it and she liked it. So.
Just point at Krista.
I just thought maybe Krista might like that if she doesn't run again.
I just-
Not.
We're a little bit off
Yeah,
track
yeah,
with
yeah,
some of
yeah,
this.
yeah.
We did off topic.
Yep.
I'd like to bring us back a little bit to the community part of it, because that's an area, I mean, some of the questions you're asking, Tracy, I think are very important and need to be addressed. I do
Yeah.
think that some of the answers
Yep.
may be available
Through the rest of the conversation.
within the
Yeah.
organization. But thank you very much, and let's see what we have for time. We may be able to circle back to some of these.
Yep.
Are there any other questions that people have about the roles and responsibilities, information that Barrett has given us? Okay. The question.
Actually, wait, I'm sorry, Tom,
Go
really
ahead.
quick. The first thing under key roles is provide an education to resident children. And you didn't touch on that.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is in terms of curriculum.
Yep.
We always say that we're responsible for curriculum, but it doesn't seem like that's.
Certainly. That's a good question. Yeah, so the one about providing an education, when I do the longer, because that's almost aspirational, if you will. Whereas, the policy work and the collective bargaining, that's more actionable.
Right.
So, I mean, yes, you have your primary duty is to provide an education to the children in Hollis and Brookline, RSA 189:1A. I mean, that's why school boards exist, to ensure that the children in their respective communities are getting an education. In terms of curriculum, if you look at the Department of Education rules 302.02, whatever it is, and RSA 194-C:4, paragraph 2, whatever the subparagraph is, you'll see that curriculum is primarily an administrative function.
Okay.
Different boards, and we know that this has been a hot button issue nationwide and in New Hampshire recently. Different boards take different positions on that. Can a board ultimately decide it wants to approve curriculum? Yes, it can. Nothing in law prevents that. My question always is, you've got a K through 12 education program here, you may pre-K for all I know. How many people sitting around this table know the first thing about the curriculum for AP Calculus? I think I mean, you understand what I'm saying.
No, I completely get it. I
You
just
know,
wanted to-
so-
I know Tom has an
Yeah,
agenda, so I
yeah.
don't want to.
No,
Yeah,
but
that's
this
fine.
is a part of it, because one of the big things that happens with the community, and I have questions about this, but they'll come to you and say, why are we teaching this? Why is this course? Why are we using this book? All things that are, frame it like policy versus procedure. Procedural, we say you have to teach science, but we don't say
What
what the
textbook.
either are
Right.
necessarily
So-
of the curriculum.
What I've encouraged some school boards to do, and it's not a statewide recommendation from NHSBA, but if you're getting those questions repeatedly, put on the agenda at one of the meetings a discussion of curriculum adoption or curriculum approval or curriculum selection, however you want to phrase it. And bring in your superintendent, bring in your assistant superintendent, bring in your high school principals, bring in the curriculum coordinator if you have it. And you have a half-hour, 45-minute conversation with the board and the educational experts that can discuss and talk about what they do when they go through and they have to, and they're looking for a new curriculum. And they're not just picking, they're not just going to Amazon and Googling, good math books. I mean, there's a process.
Barrett, is it fair to say that the administration is responsible for curriculum, but we're accountable?
So that's a fine way of putting it, Rob. And here's what I say about everything, because I get that question often at the legislature, or often, from various school boards. Who's responsible for this? Who's responsible for that? Everything is a shared responsibility. Everything is a shared responsibility. Budget, curriculum, policy, oversight and management of the staff, oversight and management of the students. If you want, I won't spend much time on it. If you go to the white paper that I sent down, on a chart, there's a chart on page, I hope it's in this one, page 14. Yeah, this is an old version because this is the one that we ripped off from my good friends in Idaho, but we have recreated this. We have a chart, and I can send you the most recent one, where it says, one column, it says policy, board meetings, budget, instruction, curriculum, personnel. And then the next column says the school board's responsibility within that domain. And then the superintendent's responsibility within that domain. None of these things stand alone. Everybody has a responsibility. And some curriculums work and some don't. I know, was it how Gina? Maybe you'll remember this as the educator at the table. How long ago was it that we were using everyday math? And then like 3 years into everyday math, everybody was like, "Holy cow, this program's terrible!" Right? 10 years ago or whatever that way. So you pivot, right? But they didn't. At the time, everyday math. Everybody thought everyday math was the greatest thing ever, and then teachers tried teaching it, and it was terrible. So we pivot and change. So does that work? Does that help? And I know we got to get to your questions there too.
If this is what the board needs, then it's valuable.
And I apologize for my cough.
So there is a scenario I was hoping to be able to engage with you on that I think this board comes across a lot. And maybe you're the role of a board member and I'm the role of a parent.
Yeah.
And I see you out on the, maybe the playground or whatever. And I say, "Hey, Barrett, I know Barrett just got on the board. And I got a real beef with some of the teachers in this that my kid has."
We're going to break that down into a couple of elements.
Right. But if I engage you and I start asking you a whole bunch of questions about this and really sharing what I think about certain people under the employ.
Yep. So, do you want to take that, or you want to, whatever you want to do?
What I wanted to say is, we've got a couple of different scenarios.
Okay.
And I formulated these questions not with anyone particular in mind, although some of you may identify with them. These are all questions that I have and that I've had and that have actually occurred to me in this role as a school board member here in Hollis and Brookline. And for example, the first one I think it points to sort of is a neighbor wants to tell me about a problem they or their child is having at school. I've directed them to the appropriate chain of command, but they still want me to hear them out. Now what?
So
what can
It's
we
exactly the scenario.
You again re-encourage them to work through the chain of command. You have to be mindful that, what did I say earlier when I was giving my sort of setting the stage? No individual school board member has any particular authority over anything. Only the board can act. And then, the other aspect too is that, and part of this I think is just a misunderstanding by members of the public through no fault of their own. They think that you've gotten elected and you are the elected official to solve their problems for them. What I often say is it's not the school board members' responsibility to quote unquote solve the problem. It's the school board members' responsibility to help that individual navigate the system to get in touch with the individual who can help them potentially solve the problem. So another reason why policy is so important: learn policy KE and KEB. Keep them on your phone. Keep them in your briefcase. Tattoo it on your forearm. Those are the two policies that relate to specific chain of command. One is about school district, what I'll call operations. I think that's KE. There are potholes in the parking lot, right? And the other is KEB, which is complaints about staff, administration, or other students. The process, the chain of communication is essentially the same. If they keep emailing you or calling you that the issue hasn't been resolved. The other thing too is that when they give this concern or this complaint, you get an email or it's a phone call or you run into them at Shaw's on the way home from work. Give your superintendent a heads up. And have the superintendent, inform most likely the building level principal, or maybe the special ed director if it relates to special education. But point that person back to the policy. Try and and if they won't listen to you, at some point, just let your superintendent know, and then your superintendent or the principal will probably give a phone call to the parent. The other thing that would, I often say would help too is ask that person, can I tell the principal to give you a call? Can I tell the superintendent to give you a call? And if they say yes, then you send off an email. And if you know the parent's email address, maybe copy the parent. Gina copied on this email is Mrs. Smith. I ran into her at the playground. She's got some issue with her child's classroom, right? And I told her you would call her. So if Gina or the superintendent doesn't call back, you're going to hear about it, right? So then you call your superintendent, you say, Mrs. Smith is, giving me a hard time now because you said you were going to call her back and you never called her back. So, and then that comes back to when you're doing the superintendent evaluation. So it's all, it all works together here now, doesn't it?
Long
It all
form.
works together.
Well, I think that
Sorry, just cut on to long form comment.
What's that? I didn't hear you, Jim.
That's what the
well,
long
for
form
Gina's
is
first
for.
year, we have to go to the long form, right?
Yeah.
So every time something happens, I'm like, long form.
Right.
Well, I think there's a balance of being able to, because I mean, people aren't talking to you because they're happy.
Yes,
Like they might be
yeah.
like, oh, this teacher's great, but usually they're coming to you
With a
in that
problem.
capacity because it's a problem.
Yep.
And I feel like you can strike that balance of empathy with redirection.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, and I have said to constituents who've talked to me, I've said, I need you to follow this chain of command. I sympathize with the situation you're in. If you continue to engage me, if this does climb to us, I would have to recuse myself.
Yep.
I don't want to have to do that. I want the full board to be able to hear any cases that come forth.
Yep.
Please do me that favor and follow. And I've never had somebody protest that.
Good.
So it's
Good.
been it's they want to be heard. Everybody
Yeah,
everybody wants to, especially when they're
you
concerned
don't
about
just,
their child.
you be respectful and they're your constituent and let's say when people are dealing with their kids, they get, if especially if something's going wrong, you can get elevated real quick, right?
Yeah.
And then you throw in a number of other factors. Is it a bullying issue, which is, bad enough? Is it a kid with a special ed issue that the parent feels they're not getting the services, which, you can certainly sympathize and understand and you've got to, as you said, you've got to be respectful to them. They're a constituent, they're a taxpayer, but you try to gently direct them to the person that can solve their problem, or at least help them out.
When I was on the Brookline board, there was a couple parents, a family that were unhappy with the services they were receiving, and they contacted the board chair, and the board chair, in their effort to help, was listening to them and trying to empathize, and unfortunately crossed the line and went so far as to say what was construed as a commitment that something would be done.
Yeah, that's.
And they ended up being sued by the parents along with the district. It went on.
Yeah.
It went on. That person no longer on the board. And
What you have to be mindful of is don't make any promises. Don't say, and innocently enough, just in the nature of the because I imagine I can look around the table. I've been doing this for a while. I imagine a number of you are on the school board because you got kids in the school, right? Imagine that. And so it's not just a constituent. It could be your next door neighbor. You're all in the PTO or the PTA together, right? So it's easy to say something like, we'll get this straightened out, or we'll get this figured out, or don't worry about it, we'll take care of it. Innocently enough, talking to a friend. Well, the parent with the problem is going to take that as, to some degree, a promise that my issue is going to be resolved in the manner that I want it resolved, and if it's not, they're going to get even more elevated then.
Yeah, but sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I've found myself in a situation where I've been speaking to a friend who's venting out about a problem, and so I always feel like I'm a lawyer where I'm like, so I'm gonna talk to you about this.
Are you
but
calling
I
me as a
should-
friend, or are you
but-
calling me as a school
Yeah.
board member?
Correct,
That's
and
it.
I actually start the conversations that way, or like, they'll start venting, be like, hang on, we're having this conversation as friend to friend, or are you
Right.
coming to me
Right.
because of the
Right.
capacity in which I sit?
Right.
And I've run into both scenarios
Yeah.
and both situations.
Yeah.
So but I think it's really important to, like, especially if you have a friend that you're speaking with in the community, that you, like, define that.
Yeah.
Because we as parents, you want to be supportive, and you want to listen because people need to be heard and want to be heard, and that's super important too. But I think it's important to call that out and understand in which context you're having that conversation, and then package that on both ends. You start the conversation reminding them that you're your friend, and end the conversation reminding them that you're their friend.
Right.
And that you had that conversation in that capacity, so that there isn't a promise. And I think that that's something to be
Sounds
mindful
good.
of for all of us.
yeah, can I flip things a little bit? Because as board members and parents of kids in the school, we have experiences, things that we have a tendency to take our experiences and use them as guideposts in some of the decisions we make. Or even worse, we're in a situation where, as parents, we're having some issues with the school, with a teacher, with an administrator. How do you balance that situation where you want your rights as an individual,
Yeah.
but you're a board member?
Right. So, couple different aspects on that. I would encourage the board member to proceed in the same way any other parent would, working through the chain of communication. You have to be mindful, though, that now that you're elected, people are going to see you differently in the community. The teachers are going to see you a little bit differently. You know, even if you call the teacher and say, I'd like to schedule a meeting with you, you know, the teacher knows that you're a school board member, and it's gonna be a little bit of a unique dynamic, you know, for them. Maintain your boundaries, obviously, you know, don't bring up school board business or whatnot when you're talking about the bullying issue or the special education issue or remedial help for your kid or whatever it might be. I would also recommend that if you're scheduling a meeting with as a parent with a teacher or a coach or an administrator, you do the courtesy of give your superintendent a heads up. Just say, hey, Gene, just want to let you know that I'm going to be at, you know, Main Street Elementary School at 3:30 on Tuesday. I've got a meeting with my kids' teacher with Main Street Elementary.
No, I'm just laughing 'cause it's like 3:30 after school.
You know, just I've got it. You know, I'm meeting with my kid's teacher about something. So,
How do we incorporate the fact that we may know things that we acquired as board members that
Yeah.
influence our unhappiness or whatever, you know?
well, presumably, I mean, anything that you may have learned through your nature as a school board member is presumably somewhat confidential because staff issues are not discussed in public sessions. So, you know, and the first rule of non-public session is it's like Las Vegas, right? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in non-public session stays in non-public session. So, you know, you just, you know, you've got to, you know, it's not that you need to, you know, we're all human beings. We can't just, you know, be a robot when we're at a school board meeting and then turn off that switch and be a, you know, a normal, you know, parent and go to work during the day. But, you know, to the extent that you know, have learned information through your work as an elected official, with that comes various obligations and certain obligations to keep it either confidential or whatever the case may be. You know, if it's something that you heard about, you know, your teacher, your kid's teacher in a non-public session because a complaint came or the superintendent had to give you an update that somebody was placed on leave for whatever reason, you know, and then 6 months later you're dealing with that individual, you gotta just, you know, keep it to the matter at hand with what the issue is with
I mean,
your
if you're
kid.
having an issue with an administrator,
Yeah.
and you know that from board activities, you know that other people have had that issue with the administrator. Does that keep you from being able to deal with it on a personal level?
Yeah, no, not at all, not at all. I mean, you know, if it's an impact, if you have the issue with the administrator because it's impacting your kid or something that you have a direct interest in, but you know, you've heard other complaints from other parents about that. Well, if you're hearing other complaints about the same individual, whether it's a teacher, administrator, coach, whatever it might be, and you're hearing those collectively throughout the committee, at some point you've got a responsibility to let your superintendent know that, hey, I've heard 10 complaints from 10 different parents over the last 6 months about this second grade teacher. Like, I don't know what's going on in that classroom, but you need to look into it. You know, and I mean, I think also too, you know, as I said, work your way up through the chain of communication. You know, if you have a deep concern with something that your kid's second grade teacher has done, or you saw it or witnessed it, or you're hearing it from other parents, let your superintendent know. Let your superintendent know. You know, and then when that person is nominated for renewal in April 15th, ask for a non-public session and go in and say, why is Sally Jones' second grade teacher's name still on the list when we've gotten 30 complaints about this person in the last 4 months, you know? So, I mean, your board can't go through evaluations, you know, that's not the best practice. You know, if you have the same complaint as other constituents, and you've heard them from other constituents, you know, and it's about a staff member, then I would say redirect that to your superintendent. And as a parent, you know, yeah, you've got a little extra access to the superintendent, but, you know, call the superintendent and say, look, I'm not happy with the way this is being handled in the second grade classroom.
Right, so I think the other thing that I have done, because my daughter's on I have more meetings with administrators and stuff for what she needs. I actually just have my husband take the lead sometimes, so like
Yeah.
I'm still involved, but
Yeah.
he's a support person. He's a parent also, and he's not on the board.
Yeah.
So if he needs to advocate,
Good idea.
I just let that happen.
So you're
like,
an
I
arm's
can
length away.
but that way it's not
Yeah.
me. Yeah, like I'm there. I'm still standing up for what I think we need as
Yeah.
a family, but I think that can be an option too. It's just
Yeah,
like
good
either
thinking.
your partner or the other parent or an advocate or just someone
Yeah.
else to just kind of say, hey, we're coming at this from, and this is how you know it's not a board issue. It's
Yeah.
a parent issue.
Nice.
Yep, I was
100%.
gonna
Yeah.
actually say that, because there have been instances in the past year and a half where my husband and I look at each other and he's like, I'll send that email so it's not and I'm
Yeah.
like, perfect,
Yeah.
we'll start there,
Yeah.
and we'll follow that
Yeah.
reporting chain,
Yeah.
but we'll have my husband kick that
Yeah.
reporting chain off, and then
Good idea.
if it ever got to a point where we need to
Yeah.
escalate it, then I'd get involved.
Yeah.
Obviously on the higher levels, but we've never had to do that.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. But yeah,
That's a good
leaning on
option
your
if you've got it.
spouse is
You've got
just
that,
making
yeah.
those
Yeah.
decisions. I tend to take the lead on all things education, just being the former educator in our house, but there are certain things where he's like, you can't send that email.
Right.
I'll take care of it. So
Right.
it's similar.
Or
and
if I'm
it's
really
nice,
angry about
right?
something, it's
Oh,
like that's just not going to be helpful for you to
Yeah.
express
Yeah.
that
It's
right now.
smart.
So-
Yeah, so as a board member,
I'll
I
send it.
try to be mindful of that. And
Yep.
so, like, my husband's really supportive in that too. And sometimes he'll stop me. He'll be like, no,
Right.
let me send that one.
Right.
Can I go back to something you said though too, because I do think we each have a role as a parent, potentially some of us do, and we do have a role as a board member. And I haven't had any issues, but I would never tell Gina about something with my third grader, for example, because
Gotcha.
I think it might infer to her that I want her to do something about
Yeah,
it. Where
that's
I
fair.
think it's following that normal chain of command
Right.
that we all know maybe a little bit better. We have to remind our constituents
Right.
of it, but that I go to the teacher first. I don't leap over a teacher to go to the principal.
Yeah, no, that's reasonable.
So I'm just like,
Yeah, if-
just want to be clear because
Yeah,
it's a
so
little
you're right.
have to
If-
look at that
if
tattoo
it's
that's
just
there
your
to
issue-
get rid of the
Yeah.
If it's just your issue and your concern,
it's a
yes,
little thing,
absolutely.
I'm not gonna
But yeah, I guess in the
infer that
context
Gina-
of, you know, as Tom said, he's heard, you know, your hypothetical was you've heard other concerns from other parents and other constituents. So if you're getting multiple emails
Yeah.
about the same teacher,
And then you have it.
then
That's
you
different.
got to, you know, like, I don't know
Because
what's
you
going
have
on,
to
but I've heard
figure
from 5 parents in the last 2 weeks about this one particular teacher. I don't know what's going on in that second grade classroom, but something needs to take a look
And I
at
would
what's
do
going.
that as a parent if I had
Yeah.
heard multiple and or a board member.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
but-
I was just
Yep.
gonna say, you said something. I went to your training when I first became a school board member, and one of the things I remember very clearly, and it's probably the thing I took. I'm sure I took other things too. Was like your responsibility as a board member to the superintendent is to kind of keep them abreast of if there's something out there going on that they could wake up on a Monday morning
No
and be like,
surprises. No
you know,
surprises.
slammed with it.
Yep.
So if you are at that Little League game and there are 14 parents and they are all complaining about something that happened in the second grade classroom,
Yep.
I feel like
Yep.
you don't tell them, you just
Yep.
want to make sure that
Yep.
I just want you to know that something's going
That's
on
right.
here because
Agreed.
I don't want you to get slammed with it
Yep.
because you know a little preparation is a good thing.
Yeah.
And I've taken that pretty seriously and try to do
Great.
that. So I mean that's
Great.
Can I just add, Tom, maybe this is the next question you're going to, but I know, just keeping an eye on the time, we're coming into budget season, town meeting, deliberative session. I know our board has a meeting at the end of this month where we're gonna have a tax cap presentation that is public and we think would be helpful for the public to attend.
Yep.
How can we, cause that's one of the biggest things I know I hear a lot is, no one communicates with us, none of us knows when any of this is happening, and I know that's like, there's balance, right? But like, how can we as citizens also just say, hey, we think this might be informative?
I mean, there's nobody in the audience.
Right. Right. So I'm wondering if there is a way that
Are we live streaming or is this going up later? It's
Just
live.
live.
It's live.
So people are watching,
Yeah,
you know,
so
to some
maybe.
degree, maybe,
Maybe,
right?
yeah.
I mean, I don't, you know, and, you know, I certainly understand from, you know, a parent perspective. 6:30 at night is not a convenient time. Well, tell me when is a convenient time, because, you know, Saturday mornings there's going to be Little League games and hockey games and cross-country meets and who knows what else. You know, at nighttime after a long day at work, people are going home to tend with the kids and dinner and bath and bedtime and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, I mean, you know, I think I talked about a little bit at the beginning. You know, you know, we're not sending newsletters home anymore. I don't know to the extent that you do a social media presence, if at all.
Well, and that's one of the things, and we've been told to some degree to be very, very careful
Yes.
of being on social media, because regardless of how you present it, whether you present it as your personal view.
I was
or
thinking the
you're putting-
district
or
having
if
social
you're-
media
no, but
presence.
the
but,
district
I mean,
doesn't have it.
Right.
So, you know, in the past, some board members
Yeah.
have taken it upon themselves.
Yeah.
We tried to do it in the co-op, but, to
Have a
publicize things.
Yep.
But when the question is asked, if you close it down to comments, you get ripped for doing that.
Right.
If you leave it open for comments
ripped.
and you don't answer it,
Right.
then you're being unresponsive.
Or there could be miscommunication that gets
And
put
then,
out.
and then how do you
Yeah.
participate without it being you're speaking for the board, even when you're doing it on your personal account?
Yeah, we have, and I mentioned the electronic communications training that we do. We do a portion on guidelines and recommendations for social media use. Our staff attorney has drafted basically a disclaimer, if you will, that we recommend people put up on their banner or a pin, whatever. This is not an official page of the Hollis Brookline School Board. This is not reflective of the Hollis Brookline School Board. All comments on here are mine only, and are not reflective of the school board. You know, some board members, I think, you know, use it without drama to just put out, you know, budget hearing tonight, holiday concert tonight.
I was gonna say, it's very
Bake-
different when it's informative
bake-
versus an opinion
Yeah,
of,
bake,
of
you know,
it.
bake sale
Come
tonight.
support
That I've got,
this.
that I've got no problem with.
Yeah.
You know, somebody could post that the moon is made of cheese, and you could reply, no, it's not, and then you're gonna have 600 comments after that of people arguing whether or not the moon is made of cheese. It doesn't matter what the topic or subject matter is. People are gonna argue one way or the other on it, right?
Is
So
there something that you would like to do and are trying to figure out
Yeah,
if it's
so
okay?
what I'm trying to figure out is as we're heading towards this tax cap meeting, which is gonna be important
Yeah.
for us to understand.
So, Gina, send me an email tomorrow or morning, and I'll send out the
Yeah,
documents.
or
to
just
the
like
central
budget hearings
office.
are coming up.
Yeah.
Please come to this is the budget hearing is at this time on
Yeah.
this night. If you would like to express your, like, that's all I wanna do is just kind of
Right.
share that, but I also don't wanna start, like, the
Yeah,
town
I
pages
mean,
here can be a
Like,
little.
without me,
And then you
our
can
staff
just say,
attorney.
I can't talk about it.
Yeah.
But we
Or-
can't, we
well, that's
can't
the other
engage,
thing,
the
too.
rules are, our
Right.
rules are that we can't engage here. We're eager to have you show up to, I've had to do this.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I just think that would be helpful. I think that would.
No, you're right. It's
Another thing that you might want to consider too, it can be pricey, but I know some boards have done it very successfully. Some boards have keep communications firms and PR firms on retainer, where when you have a big, you know, the budget hearing, they'll draft up a one-page thingamajig. You know, I know Concord, because you know, it's part of the city, it's a big district. They have a communications director on staff for the Manchester School District. I don't know if it's a city employee or a school district employee, whatever it is. But I know some boards use that. You know, and there are different levels of services that you can purchase. You know, do you want this guy to write not even, and I hate to call it a PR firm, but you know, a press release for you, for lack of a better phrase, once a week, once every other week, once a month.
But what do you
as
do with
needed.
it?
I mean, you know, you post it on the website. You know, you email it to whatever email addresses that you have. You know, to parents and community members.
That's the challenge that we've got. We've got the engaged audience who are already there, and we are communicating with them, but the vast majority of the community shows up at our at the major meeting and say, I knew nothing about this.
Well, I
I said,
mean-
well, it was on our website and it was in our newsletter. Well,
And
I
it was
don't
in
get
the
that
minutes
because
and we
because
discussed
we
it at
don't
the
have a
meeting.
public newspaper anymore.
Right. I mean, that's.
I mean, is it, can
Yeah, we've had this-
they
It's a big
throw it out
challenge.
somewhere?
Yeah.
We've had this conversation, we tried to bring it up in the co-op school board where there's 7 of us, so,
Yeah.
like, I'm the board chair, like, could I simply write a summary of each meeting? Not the minutes, a summary of
Yeah.
each meeting, and just, put it out there, like, through
Right.
the Hollis Brookline online
Right.
Rotary newsletter.
Yeah.
And, we had a conversation as a board, and it was, felt like that could be an inappropriate, because you don't know what I'm gonna write,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
could I be
Do we have to come back and
biased?
approve
Like,
it and-
how do I
right.
make sure that it's completely 100% objective? And
Right.
so we've been struggling. Like when you said we should have a communication plan as a school board, we don't. But I think it's because we're struggling with
Yeah.
what does that mean?
I'll also send Gina some information about developing communication plans and maybe some resources that you can tap into.
just as from the
too.
board's
Yeah,
perspective, because we
yeah,
do
yeah.
have SAU communications,
Right.
like they work through it, but we're talking about trying
Your
to meet the
your
broader
district.
community.
Yeah.
Like the SAU
Yeah.
is responsible for communicating with the parents.
Right.
But how do we reach
You know,
the broader
one-
community and let them know that these events are
Right.
happening?
So one.
Beth had a question.
Oh.
Oh, it was more of a comment. It doesn't address the overall, but maybe a little bit more specific to what you're, and it's been a number of years, and it's a lot of it's the time and the energy that goes
Yeah.
into it. But when
Yeah.
I did first get on the board, I did a lot of that in social media, and I would set an event for different meetings, like whether it was a budget or it was a
Yeah.
public hearing, and I would send it out, and I got a lot of people that would say, oh, they get reminders for it, and they would show up for it, and
Yeah.
but it was only informational, and I had no issues. I had a lot of people that said, oh, I forgot today was voting
Right,
day.
like if
I
you
forgot
create it
this
as an
was-"
event and invite people as an event on Facebook,
Mhm.
or just, I think that might
Through my
work
page.
as
It
a.
worked really well.
Do it as
I
a
just
public
couldn't
event.
keep up on it, but I had my own, I
but
did
I
do
think
that
that's
just for
helpful, yeah.
informative, and it was very well received, and I had no
No,
negative
that
feedback.
event is a really.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that at least first, because I think it's important. I mean, I think it's gonna,
That doesn't bother
people
you.
need to know.
And that's what I was gonna say about like, if you're talking about like putting something on Hollis Brookline online and writing a summary, why not just write minutes are posted, go here to board
Right.
docs, now that we have board docs, just, then it's
I think that they actually
informational,
post the
it's
minutes
not-
already, so
they
yeah,
do.
But you know what I mean, like,
Right.
it's just, I think there's ways to leverage social media for information without without engaging.
Agreed.
I think there's a very appropriate way to do it, and then there's ways that we can do it, and I think if that's something we want to do,
Yeah.
we should have that maybe as a later agenda items for this board, for our boards. I mean, I just
just
think it's
wanna
important.
interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
We're closing in on what was scheduled. I think this is worthwhile if people wanna continue and Barrett's
Fine by
willing to
me.
stay, but I don't wanna, it means the meeting may get pushed out a little bit. Are people okay with continuing this, or do we wanna have a hard stop?
I mean, there's more pizza.
Well, we have in our agenda half hour set for public input.
I think we have a little bit more time.
Should we open it up for public input just for the 30 minutes?
Sure. So,
We
okay, then I get the feeling that we're gonna keep going. At 7:30, I may introduce a public input, so if people wanna join us, they have the added benefit of
Another
talking
person
with,
here, yeah.
of preaching to our guests.
Bonus
If
Barrett.
I could just one last bit and then we'll move on. So there are two different angles here. And I'm not necessarily hitting on the angle that we're talking about. I see the two angles here. One is disseminating information to the communities at large. The other is engagement with your constituents. To some degree, two different things, right? One is pushing out the info about the budget hearing or about this important meeting or this important vote. I know some school boards have, do collectively, is there again, I'm going to use this as a plan, I'm going to put plan, I'm just putting that in quotation marks, to go out and meet the people where they are. And I raised this as an issue, so Concord, from, let's just say, May or June until probably about this time of year, it's every Saturday or Sunday morning there's a farmer's market. They close off a couple streets right by the State House in Concord, and there's a farmer's market. So a number of years ago, the Concord School Board asked the people who run this farmer's market, can we have a booth? And they said yes. So every Saturday morning or whatever it is, there's a booth, and 2 members of the Concord School Board volunteer on a rotating basis, and they basically sit there and whatever question, if you've got a question or a comment for the Concord School Board, we're here for you from 9 to noon.
But how does that
I brought
jive
that
with
up
the
in
idea
policy.
that an individual can't speak for the?
Well, I mean, they're given that authority, presumably who's ever appointed to the board to go to attend that Saturday morning has been given some level of authority by the board to speak on behalf of the board. You
Not
gotta
make
trust
commitments
the
and
people
stuff,
you're sending, though. You gotta be mindful that, if it's a question that they can't answer, then don't answer it and say the board chair will get back to you, or we'll look into that, or the superintendent will call you, or whatever it might be. And it's just, it's letting the constituents know that you're here in the community and we're gonna have this opportunity to answer questions if you want.
We've talked about doing it like
guys.
for an
Yeah.
old
We can all go to the
I
dump.
know.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, every
Every
town's got their own
Yeah.
thing.
Right, we talked about doing it, but we've been concerned about
Yeah.
the perception that it would be seen that we're putting forth some sort of an agenda, or that we're being political, or that, so, and how would we
You're
manage
gonna-
it?
you're-
Like,
you're
it's
I think
tricky.
one of the biggest,
That'll lead the way.
the biggest things that hook a board member in social media is if someone's posting something that is completely false,
Right.
or completely just wrong, but that's the way they understand it. And it's such a need for them to set the record straight. I happen to be very close to a budget committee member that reads and wants to do that. And my
You're not
guidance,
gonna change anybody's mind.
and my guidance to that individual is, that's not your role.
Right.
If they want to say something wrong, it's wrong.
Right.
It's not your job to correct or teach.
That's right.
Let it go.
Right. Right.
I'm sure she loves that advice.
Yeah. Well, the individual loves that.
I was just gonna say, on that note too, although I've not done that here, on my first school board, we did that a lot, and that was something we'd even, sometimes with the right permissions, it could even be on a campus, but I think it's important just to remind people, like, a lot of times people come in with great ideas, they have ideas or whether it's policy, procedure, but when we would always stop people, like if I would hold like one of those sessions, if they start complaining about a teacher, the superintendent, that's not the point of it. So there's certain things I think it's very comfortable for a school board member to listen about a new
Right.
curriculum idea, or a cool budget saving thing, or
Yep.
cameras on school buses. Like, we got so many things, like we never even knew like certain apps were available, things like that. So we definitely got a lot of good feedback, but again, it's just giving people a chance to talk to. But if it was a problem solving thing specific, like, you just have to kind of know how to navigate that
Yeah.
and redirect that.
Yeah.
But I thought it was really a good thing to get
So
out.
it sort of segues into it. Again, another side of the coin. My question is, if I don't agree with a decision or action or a policy that the board approved, if I was on the minority side,
Yep.
can I make my dissenting opinion as a board member public?
Yeah.
And if they're not aligned with the majority?
Yeah, so certainly. So just because you're an elected official does not mean you're relinquishing any other rights. Your right to speak out, and your free speech rights. What we've got to be mindful of is that recognizing that majority wins, 5-member board, 3 people are going to carry the day. We also have to be mindful of that. Don't publicly disparage your fellow board members because they voted a way that you would not have voted. If a constituent comes up to you at the ball game or at Hannaford's and they say, "Why didn't you vote for this?" Tell them why. I thought it was too much money. I thought we didn't have enough information. I wanted the committee to look at it some more. I just, tell them why you didn't support the motion or you didn't support the expenditure or whatever it was. That's completely fine. A constituent is asking your position on something that you've acted on. By all means, tell them why. But what we've got to not do, and this is, we certainly see this on social media, where, the one person that voted no on this, that, or the other thing, 10 minutes after they get home, or if they're not even doing it from the meeting, posting it all over social media. These people don't know what they're doing. These people don't know what they're doing. The 4 board members can't add. They don't know how to do a budget. I'm the only person that knows how to do a budget. I mean,
It almost seems like this has happened.
I may have gotten that. I may have gotten this
Very
question
detailed.
before. You know, first of all, be an adult. Like, right? Like, be an adult. We're going to disagree on certain things. I don't need to disparage people, you know, because we have policy disagreements on certain things. You know, say your piece, you know, at the board table. You know, do you have to bend over backwards to outwardly support what the majority did? It would be nice if you could, but if you can't do that, then, you know, there was one situation that, you know, the board voted to bond. I forget if it was an expansion or a new building or whatever it was, and they'd been trying to do this for years, and they thought they finally had the public support. And one board member, it was in a co-op, went to every town and sitting in the town library in the gazebo and hanging up signs, and one board member single-handedly got, you know, went on a campaign to get the voters to defeat the bond. You know, and did she have the right to do that? Yeah, absolutely. Was it, you know, respectful of the other, you know, 8 board members, because it was a good-sized co-op, the other 8 board members that all supported this? Probably not, you know. So, you know, do you have the right to do that? Yeah, absolutely. Explain to your constituents why you supported this or why you did not support that. The other thing, too, is recognize that, you know, some boards are, you know, every vote's unanimous. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. That's not my decision to make. But, you know, a 3-2 vote on one issue, we're in the minority. You're going to be a 3-2 vote where you're going to be in the minority on the next time, right? So just, you know, recognize that, you know, and especially if it's a big issue for you, you know, if, you know, the 3-2 vote on painting the walls blue or white, you know, who cares? But, you know, a 3-2 vote on whether or not to support a bond or a collective bargaining agreement or, you know, a budget, a big ticket item, you know, you gotta, so yes, you can, just be mindful of the way in which you're going to express that, and be mindful, you know, of the fact that your fellow board members are doing what they think is in the best interest of the kids as well. You may think you're doing is you know, what's in the best interest of kids. So do your fellow board members. So at least have that level of maturity and respect as adults.
Does anything of what you've said change if you're in a different public meeting? So, for example, if I'm at a select board meeting,
Yeah.
and the select board sees me there and asks me,
And knows you're a board member.
says, you know, why did you support this? Why did the board do this? So on and so forth. Is that, it's an impromptu
Yeah.
situation. Is that something where you just say it's inappropriate, or do you?
And just say, you know, say,
I appreciate your inquiry.
Yeah.
May I direct you to the meeting minutes?
yeah, right. Well, that's,
No,
yeah,
that's
I mean,
exactly
that's,
what I was thinking.
yeah.
Even if you don't disagree.
No, but what I think, I mean, just off the top of my head, what I think of the proper response would be, I can't speak on behalf of the full board, but I supported that, and I'll tell you why I supported it.
I mean, because I like that because we talk about how can we get the information out. We may not get the audience, but the select board might.
Right.
And if it's an opportunity to disseminate information, I hate to pass it up. At the same time,
Right.
I don't want to misrepresent.
Right. I mean, one way that could be addressed, I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head here, and I don't, maybe there's a need for it, and maybe there isn't, you know your communities better than I. You know, ask the select board can the school board have 5 minutes on your agenda to talk about the things that we did at the last meeting? I don't know, just I'm just thinking out loud here. And then you send the board chair or whoever is authorized to, and just read them the minutes then.
Well, I mean, Hollis is in a good position where we actually have an ex officio member of the select board,
Oh,
or
do
excuse
you?
me, of the budget committee.
Yeah.
Which also has a select board member on it as
Yeah.
an ex officio.
Yeah.
So a lot of those conversations
Are
happen
had
and
there.
the connection is made.
Good.
Is made there, and
Yep.
that's been incredibly effective
I
for
bet.
us throughout all of it.
I bet.
Because they school update is on the agenda
Yeah.
every month.
Good. Good.
Yeah. If, you know, unfortunately, Brookline doesn't have a budget committee to do that, so
Yeah.
it becomes a little bit different. But yeah, I heard about that. You at previous training many moons ago, you made a comment or a response to a question about abstaining.
Yep.
And I remember that clearly. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yep.
But could you talk a little bit about that, but also talk about the larger issue about when should a board member be recusing themselves?
Yep.
When should they abstain?
Right.
At least in your opinion.
Yeah, so they're related, but they're a little bit different. An abstention is not voting. Okay, you're sitting at the table, you may or may not be part of the discussion, but you're not taking a vote. A recusal is where you get up and you leave the table and you sit in the audience or you go out in the hallway for a second. Because you were not being part of the discussion, you're not being part of the conversation, and you're not voting. We recommend that abstentions occur in very limited circumstances. For example, if you missed last meeting, you might abstain from the vote on whether or not to approve the minutes. Simple stuff, right?
Is it optional whether you approve minutes?
What's that?
Is it optional? Can you approve minutes if you were not?
Yeah, there's nothing in New Hampshire law that requires an individual to recuse themselves from a discussion or to abstain from a vote. It's up to that individual to do the proper thing, and I'll talk about the recusal in a minute and the way one board handles this. So an abstention is you're not voting. So you've got to be mindful though too of when you're counting the votes, and I've seen this happen. Number of years ago, not common. So if let's say a 5-member board, one person abstains, you're counting 4 votes then, right? The majority of 4 is still 3, so 3 votes would carry the vote. Let's say you've got 4 members because one person is homesick or traveling for work or whatever and can't call into the electronically, and then one person abstains. You've got 3 votes. How many carries a motion when there's only 3 votes being cast? 2. So you potentially have the situation where less than a majority of the board members are directing action for the district, right? So be very mindful about that. Be very, very mindful about that. I saw this, a board member, the board is having a lot of challenges at the time. They were down a person either had resigned or whatever it was, and the board was split. You had 2 people on this side, 2 people on this side. I mean, they couldn't get they couldn't agree on the basic stuff. They could not agree on naming the replacement to fill the vacancy, right? Because they had some tuition agreements going on, and these people wanted that, and these people wanted that. So anyway, so then a person, threw their name in the hat, whatever the application process, whatever they were having, and one of the board members, it was like his best buddy, like next door neighbor. He thought that created a conflict of interest, and it didn't. So he was trying to do the right thing, give him credit for that. So he abstained then. So you had a situation, because there was only 4 people on the board, 3 votes being cast, and the guy who abstained didn't get to vote on who the replacement was. So he lost out on that, right? Just an example of how it can go haywire a little bit. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going, just in the effort of keeping the meeting going, I'm going to open public discussion so that we can get the clock started.
Yep.
At 7:39, I'm going to open the floor for public discussion. We're going to continue our conversation with Barrett. If a member of the public does show up, this conversation is also open to public discussion, but I remind them that public input is just that. It is input, and that's separate from any back and forth conversation. It's how we gain information from the public, but it will not necessarily gain any immediate response at this meeting. So we'll start the clock ticking at 7:40, and someone, if I don't remember, please remind me at 8:10 to close public discussion. Thank you.
Gotcha.
So and I'll get to recusal in a minute because it's slightly different. I've seen board members abstain because they felt that like they didn't have enough information, or they wanted the committee to study a little bit more, whatever. They weren't ready to make a decision on the issue at hand. My response to that is that motions are always made in the positive or in the affirmative, right? To see if the board will do something, will act in some way. Even if you feel that you don't have enough information to make an informed decision on that issue, you vote no then, because you cannot support the motion, right? I don't support that expenditure because I want to hear more from the curriculum committee. I don't approve this committee report because I think the committee needs to go back and whatever it is, investigate it more, research more, bring more people into the, right? So that's our take on that. The question is, can you support the motion? If not, for whatever reason, you want more information, even if you support the general concept, but you're not ready to vote on it, you vote no then, right? You're elected to decide. You're elected to vote. That's why the people elected you to come and make these decisions. That's abstentions. Recusal is when there is a conflict of interest. The conflict of interest is a direct and personal pecuniary interest that is immediate, definitive, and capable of demonstration, not remote, uncertain, contingent, and speculative. So primarily pecuniary interest, money, right? If there is a conflict of interest and a pecuniary interest at hand, you recuse yourself. Meaning
What is pecuniary?
What's that?
What does pecuniary mean?
Monetary.
Okay.
Monetary. So and there are different variations of that I'll get into some examples as well too. So you recuse yourself, meaning you don't sit at the table, you do not participate in the discussion, you do not participate in the deliberation, you don't speak, you're almost not there, right? You can sit in the audience, that's fine, but you're not participating in the board discussion about it. Pecuniary interest, there are some obvious examples. I know I'm the board chair and I own a snow plowing business, and I'm going to put in the bid for the to do the driveways in the winter. One, I don't think you should put in the bid to begin with, but that's beside the point. You obviously can't vote on that because you have a pecuniary interest in the nature of that contract. The most common example that we hear about is, I've got a spouse, I'm on the board, but my spouse is a teacher, and we're doing the collective bargaining and whatnot. A lot of times conflicts of interest are not necessarily direct conflicts of interest, but the most important aspect is, what are your constituents thinking? Is it a perceived conflict of interest? What's the public perception about this issue? I'll tell you right now, I can think of a board member that I know. He was on his school board for 25 years. Both his wife and his daughter worked in the district and were part of a collective bargaining unit. He had a background in finance, so he knew numbers really good, right? Knew collective bargaining really good. Year after year after year, his board chose him to be the lead negotiator, and he kept getting reelected. So, so to some degree, I'm like, everybody in town that's voting for this guy knows full well that his wife and his daughter work in the district. His board doesn't seem to have a problem with it. The voters keep electing him. So am I to say that that's a conflict of interest? Nobody in that community seems to care. So, but different communities are different. One board that I know of, I like the way they do this. It's not binding, but it gives you a good sense of how to go. If somebody believes they have a conflict of interest, but they're not quite certain about it, I'm not sure, is this not? And it doesn't always have to be monetary, but that's the most common one. They put it out to the board. The board member declares it and says, I'm uncertain if this is a conflict of interest. what do my 8 other fellow board members think, and they take a vote. It's non-binding, but fortunately they've got enough respect for one another where if 8 people on your board are saying, yeah, Tom, we think this is a conflict of interest, that person will step down. So, it alleviates, you're addressing it and making it open. The board member who has the perceived, the real or actual conflict or even perceived conflict is addressing it publicly. And then the board is kind of insulating itself a little bit too, saying, like, we think this is, and you can't force that person to step down. It's not binding. They can't make him recuse himself. But, if he doesn't recuse himself and the 8 other board members are saying, yeah, Tom, you should really recuse yourself, how's that going to look to the public then, right? So I think that's a pretty good way to handle those sorts of things. The relative that doesn't live with you or live under your house, so it's just my cousin or my nephew. I don't personally think that's a conflict of interest. How direct is it? Is it that person? Let's say it's my 23-year-old. Let's say I've got a 23-year-old daughter and she gets her first teaching job, but because a 1-bedroom apartment in Dover, New Hampshire, where I live, is $2,200 a month. She's going to live at home while she's paying off some of those school loans. Is she paying me some rent? I don't know. Does that make it closer to a conflict of interest if I'm negotiating her collective bargaining agreement? Is she pitching in with the food bill every month? You can take this to sort of extreme examples that border on the absurd, but things that are actually real life though, like questions that I've gotten from school board members. My daughter just graduated. She lives with us. While she gets on her feet and pays back some of those school loans. And oh, by the way, she's in the bargaining unit. Can I vote on this? Can I negotiate it? It's not that uncommon these days for something like that to happen. So anyway, use abstentions very rarely. Conflict of interest, recuse yourself. If you're not certain, put it out to the rest of your board members and see how they feel about you participating in the conversation.
That point about voting no, and voting no isn't opposing it, it's just not supporting.
Exactly.
And because an abstention is also not supporting, but it doesn't preserve the ratio
Correct.
of voting.
Correct.
And I think that to me is a, thank you for bringing that up. That's a
Never
real big
considered
distinction.
it that way.
Yep.
I've gone through everything that I had prepared. Are there other questions that you have at this time?
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
What about when public members ask about, like, specifically about policy? Like we had voted on something in Hollis in the spring that people in the community had strong feelings about, and so people were asking me, not like, oh, I'm mad at that teacher, but like really asking about about the policy and having thoughts about it.
Yeah.
And I wonder what your thoughts are.
I think that's completely reasonable. If it's policy or budget, those are the 2 primary school board roles and responsibilities. So, and here's sort of I'm glad you brought that up. Here's one of the examples that I give when we're doing our sort of roles and responsibilities training, and the difference between chain of command and the difference between something that's more within the board's purview. So the simple example that I always get is the dress code policy, right? First week of school, last week of school, always problems with the dress code policy. Right? The administrator nods and chuckles along, right? So let's say some kid violates the dress code policy and he'd already been given a warning or 2. So he gets 3 days of detention the last 3 days of school, right? So the father calls you and says, this is garbage. My kid shouldn't have gotten detention. I think that's ridiculous. As a school board member, what can you do? Nothing. Well, the principal made the decision, work your way through the chain of command. However, the second example that I give, or the second scenario, the same father comes up to you and says, look, I get it, but I really think that the policy on the dress code is pretty stupid and really needs to be rewritten. That's fine. I'll bring that to my board. If my board, if the board wants to revisit the dress code policy, we'll revisit the dress code policy. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. So the differences between, it's the same issue at play, but the way it's phrased, one totally within the board's purview, the other is an administrative function.
Yeah, that's all.
Anybody else? Come on, Beth.
I just wanted to
Spit it
comment
out.
on one thing from earlier. It was about making sure we don't violate like a quorum, and I was brought up about doing BCC for emails, and it's just a personal thing for me, but it's a big, I actually very strongly oppose that. I would much rather if my superintendent or my board chair is emailing me, I know that it's gone to my entire board.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, but the other part too, and so I think that's kind of like an easy one, right? Just because then we know it's gone to everybody, and I don't have to sit here and wonder, well, did Holly send it to Tom?
Right.
Like all that, because I've been on that board before. If you want to know, like look up, you can Google some of the Texas school boards. It's super fun. You don't want to be on those. But then the other part, I think the whole point of that, the question was to like avoid violating that. But I just wanted to remind, it's actually easier to do than you think, even if it's not in writing like that. And a really good example is if, Rob and Tom and I, we just happen to have this great idea. We're talking about something. The three of us we're not, I talked to Rob about something because I thought it would be a great idea, and then I happened to run into Tom, and he and I talked about it. So that's just 3 out of our 7, so that's fine, it's not a violation. But Tom doesn't know that I talked to Rob, and Tom talks to Holly. So then the 4 of us know all about this great idea, and we show up ready to vote on something, and the other 3 ladies on our board have no idea. So you can violate it in a lot of ways not even knowing. So I think it's just, don't reply all. Like, there's just certain things you have to be careful. And if I have a conversation with Rob about something and I happen to talk to Tom, I'm trying to be really transparent about telling Rob, like, hey, I think this is really awesome. I want it on our agenda. I'm going to talk to Tom about it too. So then we know, the 3 of us know, because when one of the 3 of us talks to a 4th board member, then we violate. So it just,
but isn't it
part of that
to try to influence the vote though?
Right.
So like you can talk about things, but you can't influence the vote.
Right.
So in that situation, would that be a violation?
No.
It's perception, though. You have to be careful with the perception.
A lot of the a lot of the right to know law stuff is perception.
Correct.
There's so there are some aspects of the right to know law that are pretty hard and fast, right? It's pretty black and white. Quorum, post, minutes, 24 hours, non-public session, motion, etc. There are also some provisions in the right to know law that talk about the intent. What was were you purposely doing an end around the right to know law? No, I happened to run into a board member at Hannaford's because we were both getting milk on the way home. No, I ran into a fellow board member because our kids are on the same T-ball. We're not lining up votes and we're not doing stuff in secret, but we're talking about things we have in common, and we're talking about an important issue. And there's a provision in the right to know law, an exception to the meeting. It talks about a chance, and do I have it in here? I don't think I do. I want to get the language right, but it says, a meeting does not include a chance, social, social, or other meeting not intended for the purpose of discussing official school district business. Now, if you're on a 5-member board and the 3 of you are at the T-ball game because your kids play together, don't line up to vote. You know what I'm saying? Don't, we good, Rob? We good on this? So I'll call somebody else and try and sway, don't do that. But, if you're sitting there on a 2.5-hour T-ball game, God bless you. But, you're going to talk about the bond, right? You're going to talk about the collective bargaining agreement. You're going to talk about the budget. It's just,
Yeah, I agree. And I think my point is just not, I just would rather not ever use BCC features and not just have a conversation
Different
with Rob
attorneys
and
might
not
have
say,
different.
Hey, by the way, I also talked to Tom, because it just, again, it's the perception of it. So even if the intent's not there, you just have to be that's with
Certainly.
that.
When I BCC people, I say BCC'd on this is blah blah
Yeah,
blah.
yeah, you're right. Right.
Yeah.
That's good
That's
cover.
another way to do it.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so you're informing everybody, but you're mitigating the risk.
Right,
of
because I
the
want people
reply
to
all.
know what I'm
Who you're
trying.
talking to.
Yeah, I want
Yeah.
people to know information.
Certainly.
I mean, we can't just function in a vacuum
Right.
here every month
Right.
for 2 hours.
Exactly.
I don't think that's very efficient.
Agreed.
And so there does have to be some ways for us to not look like we're doing anything clandestine, but get things done.
I do appreciate that clarification though, because we also do have to be people in our town and all that. And when you live in a small town, there was one time when 2 of us showed up with the former chair on a pond,
Right.
and it was like we were kind of so paranoid about that
Yeah.
that we didn't go near each other.
Right.
So we really need to like
Yep.
have our lives and have
Yep.
our kids'
Or, like,
lives.
my daughter is
And
the
I had
same
no
age.
interest in talking about that stuff then,
Yeah.
but I can't be paranoid about public perception
Right.
if I'm happen to be talking to people that have kids my
when we used to
kids'
do our
age.
trainings
Yeah.
in person in Concord before COVID, we went to webinar, we'd get the question, 3 or 4 school board members wanted to carpool to our training in Concord, and they're
that,
like,
but,
do
yeah.
we all have to take individual cars? I said, just talk about the Red Sox or the Patriots and the weather, don't talk about the
'cause,
the
like, my
sports.
daughter's
Because back then, they
Same
were something to
age.
talk about.
She's the same age and she's in the same class as the principal's daughter. They're friends. They go to birthday party. They're in the same dance group. Like he and I cannot just like
Yeah,
dive
you
down the
can't,
hallway
and-
every time like we see each
yeah.
other coming. Like you have to like that's weird, you know. Like people are gonna be like more concerned. Like why is she throwing herself down a hallway? Like
Right.
so yeah, I think I do appreciate that because and it's like we don't ever talk, but right, it's just like hi, how are you? Great, like but yeah, it's nice to know that you don't have to avoid when there's really no practical
Just
way
use common sense.
to avoid that situation.
Exactly. Which we do.
Barrett,
Yeah.
is there anything that in this context that you think is worthwhile us discussing that we haven't discussed?
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like we were pretty thorough. I mean, I gave my little overview of sort of roles and responsibilities. You've got the white paper that you can read in your own time. I mean, I think we got a variety of questions on how the board can sort of deal with itself, how the board can deal with constituents, how the board can deal and work closely with the administration. Covered some right to know law stuff. We covered some recusal and conflict of interest stuff. I mean, nothing is jumping out at me. I'm happy to, if there are any more questions, I want to be mindful of your time. Are there any remaining questions for me?
The one thing that we had talked a little bit about that isn't necessarily on topic, but this whole idea right now, we did cover a little bit this whole curriculum thing,
Yeah.
and all of the public concern about what's being taught in our schools
Mhm.
and what can be done about it. And there's the group that's trying to get all elected officials to take these pledges that they're going to avoid all these things. What I don't really feel I understand is how can we rebut some of this stuff?
Yeah, I mean-
Is there any opportunity to really proactively?
If you effectively rebut it, they'll just start complaining about something else. That's, is just as little merit as this issue. I mean, the curriculum issue, I think I talked about, if it's that
I'm
big
thinking
of an
like
issue.
the CRT kind of conversations that took place and
You
some
know.
of the DEI stuff where I don't know that you can say anything.
Right. I mean, if people want to see do we even use textbooks anymore? I don't even think we have textbooks.
Yeah, we do.
Do you have
Well,
some
let me
textbooks?
put it this way, we pay for them.
We pay for them, right? Right.
A lot of money for 'em.
I don't know how much of the curriculum stuff is digital these days versus how much is kids still wearing
Right.
50 pounds worth of books in a backpack. So, if somebody wants to see the social studies book, show them the social studies book. You know what I mean? If they're going to come here at the meeting and complain about this, that, or the other thing, encourage them to make an appointment with Andy and or Gina and the high school principal, and I'll show you the books. The stuff in the library. You want to come and take a look at the books in the library. Fine, come and take a look at the books in the library. You're going to
Yeah,
make an
no, okay.
appointment, though. You're going to make an appointment. You're going to do it at a time when it's non-disruptive to the educational day. So I mean,
Yeah, no,
it's,
that's
when that critical race theory bill was first introduced, I don't know, 3 sessions or whatever ago, the first question the prime sponsor got was what districts is this being taught in New Hampshire? And the guy couldn't answer. So it tells you all you need to know.
Can I just ask one other question about,
What, your mic?
oh. Can I just ask one other question when you said something about the legislative stuff? Are we still following, divisive concepts? I had thought I had heard that there was some.
Yeah, so, we call it, so it started out as a bill prohibiting critical race theory from being taught in public schools. It got amended. Some people call it the divisive concepts law. I call it the anti-discrimination law. That law was found to be, you like that? I gotta, sometimes I don't have, sometimes I think it's not as good as it should be.
Well, we wore you down.
Yeah, that's fine. Everybody in the legislature knows it. So that law was found to be unconstitutional by U.S. District Court, federal court. The state is appealing that. So my understanding is that the district court's order would still remain in effect, that it's unconstitutional until the First Circuit Court of Appeals out of Boston rules otherwise. And they're not going to. And I mean, this may end up at this, I suppose, we were talking years down the road, I suppose it could end up at the, Supreme Court of the United States, and SCOTUS, that we're probably looking at 4 or 5 years before something like that would happen. But the U.S. District Court found it, for the District of New Hampshire, found it unconstitutional because it was vague. Well, not just because it was vague. A couple of different components. One, it was vague, and two, the penalty that teachers would risk losing their license. The court basically said being vague in and of itself is unconstitutional, but then you're adding on a penalty, and teachers don't know what they're allowed to teach and what they're not allowed to teach. It's unconstitutional. First Circuit will uphold that undoubtedly.
So
I
teachers
put
could
money on
breathe
that.
a little bit of a sigh of relief for not feeling that anymore?
Yeah. What's interesting, though, is that when that bill passed, the Department of Education was very eager to put out a technical advisory, also in itself vague and not very clear, but being very clear to teachers that if you violate this law, we're coming after your license. There's been no follow-up technical advisory from the Department of Education when the law was found to be unconstitutional. So they didn't want teachers to know that. But anyway.
The retractions on page 35.
Right,
in the middle.
exactly.
Classify that.
Well, we've gotten 2 hours for our nickel, and I personally want to thank you. I think
Great to see you.
what you've offered is tremendous, and it's just sort of the tip of the iceberg of what I think the NHSBA offers to us. So anyone watching, when you hear those petition warrant articles about cutting the budget
by $3,000.
No, cutting the budget to defund our membership in NHSBA, these are the kind of things that we would lose. Barrett, thank you again. Always a pleasure.
My
and,
pleasure.
For those folks here, yeah.
If they just indulge me for another 30 seconds or so. First of all, thank you again for inviting me down to SAU41. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to come down again. As I mentioned, coming and speaking at these little schools and these little communities is without a doubt my favorite part of the job. Second, as you kind of mentioned, Tom, thank you for continuing your membership in NHSBA. Through you being members of NHSBA and paying your dues, we're able to provide the policies and the trainings and the updates and all that kind of stuff. Third, I hope you found it helpful. Fourth, Gina, follow up with me. I'll get you some of those documents. Fifth, let's make sure Andy is okay. He's not like floating in an ocean anywhere. He emailed me yesterday saying he was stuck in Florida, so please give him my best. What else was I going to say? I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Randy's rule is I don't want to be there until we get power, and we don't have power.
I was gonna say Fort Myers.
He's here. No, he's like, I'm not going until we get power.
Fort Myers doesn't have power, right?
Poor guys, they got hit so bad again. Did they get it bad again? Oh, really bad?
Are we still muted?
Actually got it worse this time than they did.
Okay, we're gonna recess for 5 to 10 minutes just while people take care of things, and we will be back shortly. Thank you. Rolling again?
Let go.
Okay.
First thing I want to do is close.
Okay, thank you for your patience. It's now 8:14. Just for the record, Beth had to leave at 8:05, and we are closing public input at 8:14.
That's right.
You all good? Okay, let's get back on the agenda. Next thing up on our agenda is the discussion of the fiscal year '24 final numbers and the FY '25 first quarter. Gina, is that something you're leading?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so if you take a look at the, I'm going to start with FY24 and just go in chronological order. So if you take a look at our year-end expense report, we ended the year, if you look at expenses, negative 149. So that is so close to zero. I mean, just dollar for dollar. We were pretty accurate in everything that we budgeted for and spent. Looking down to our total revenue, the 9,227 that you see as miscellaneous is actually bank interest. So that was accrued annually. We didn't know about that amount, that dollar amount would be coming toward us, which was certainly a nice surprise. And we've now switched it so we're receiving that quarterly so we can better estimate that for the following year. But anyway, that was nice. That provided us with $11,077 as net income. If you take a look at the unassigned fund balance, because that's where it all ends up, we had a fund balance of just over $309,000 on July 1st, 2023. You see that net income of $11,077 from right above. And then you see projected balance from FY23 carryover. So when we were closing out FY23, we had some POs that were still open, waiting to be paid out. And those were not paid out for whatever reason. Those POs were closed. And so that was an additional $7,606 that came forward, giving us an ending fund balance of $327,852 for July 30th, 2024. That gives us 14.5%, where our target is 7 to 10% of our total budget. So that's where we ended.
Now, how does that factor into any things that we, does this factor into the bonuses and stuff that we
Yes,
applied?
this is
That's already
everything.
been taken out?
Moving on to FY25, so the first quarter report, we are, this is very much an estimate. We're 1 quarter in. If you look over to the total expenses, the one number that seems the farthest off is under benefits. So we're running under at 24,610, and that's because 2 of our employees are falling below 35 hours a week, which means they're no longer eligible for NHRS. So that means we're no longer paying the NHRS for those employees. So that ends up being a savings for the district. Moving on down to revenue, you see that the miscellaneous, we're putting in an expected $9,000 of interest. That certainly can go up or down, but as every quarter comes along and we receive that, we can adjust that $9,000 and better plan for it. With a projected net income of 0, that does take into consideration the expected use of the fund balance that we had budgeted for. Although it's less of the fund balance that we had budgeted for in that FY25 budget. So, if you look at the use of the fund balance, under budget 53,233, we are expected to only use the 21,377. So that's why when on the very bottom category it says beginning fund balance 327,852, which was what we saw on FY24 end of year. And then projected net income, it's the 21,377. That's the expected use of the fund balance that was part of the presented budget last year. giving us an ending fund balance, once again projected, the end of FY25 of $306,475, dropping that fund balance to roughly 12.6%, which is still above our target range.
What would be possible appropriate options for allocating fund balance to further bring it down into the target range? What could have...
So typically we use one-time expenses. We don't want to kind of falsely deflate the budget one year and then falsely inflate it the following year. If you recall, part of the use of this was because we knew that there would be an expected savings in superintendent and assistant superintendent salary line items for the next year. So we thought that we could use it for additional items. And then it turns out we don't need it as much. So if there's let's say additional computer equipment that's needed, that's sort of like a one-time purchase, would last 4 to 5 years or so, we could use it for that. Sometimes when there's an additional audit that's required, that's not annual, we would use the fund balance for that.
Is there any maintenance that's going to be required?
So maintenance is tricky because that's supposed to come out of the trust fund where our rent goes into, and that's owned by Hollis. So I think Hollis, but also the full board, would have to decide if that's an appropriate use of the fund balance or not. So, any other questions about FY25? Okay, I'm going to present the budget over there just so I can kind of walk you through line by line. If that's okay.
Yep, we're moving now into the FY26 budget discussion.
Oh, yeah.
Are you going to start with the summary or the?
The summary.
Okay.
I do love these smart boards. They're so helpful.
Okay, so starting off this discussion, there are a couple of things just to know as to how the budget was built. Well, first I'll say we start in the summer and we work as a team to try to identify what are some things we're looking for to get out of the budget. And then we look at a round one that's really just internal, and then what can we do that's maybe better than that. So here's our FY25 adopted budget. Our first version was a 1.5% increase, and then we said we could do better. So it's this 0.8% that was brought forward to the SAU budget subcommittee. This allows for a 4% increase for all salaries, just based on a 3.4% CPI and what we've been doing historically. Certainly that can change, but that just gives us a starting point. You see a savings of $19,000 as you transition to that mysterious new superintendent. And then we looked at a placeholder for the new assistant superintendent. And we looked at a couple different ways of budgeting this. Often it's 80% of the salary of the superintendent, so that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is if you look at the posted assistant superintendent full-time personnel in the state of New Hampshire, and you look at what the average is and where you would want that to be. So the average for FY24 was $134,477. So if you give moderate increases to that person from, so that was FY24. So moderate increases for 25 and then 26 of 5%, then it actually brings you to 142,000. So I think 141 is a pretty good place as a placeholder, and that's all it is. Certainly it involves looking at candidates and experience and all of that good stuff.
Gina, can you make that just a little bit larger? I don't know if I'm the only one, like 125. Not, I'm not that bad, but that's perfect, actually. Thank you.
So that's the line here. And then, as I mentioned, a couple of our a couple of our hourly folks have reduced hours, and that you'll see later on in the budget in lines 59 and 60.
Is that reduction in hours something that was forced on them, or is that a agreed upon?
That was an agreed. So it's always a challenge because you don't want to kind of reduce the position, but currently we have it. We're running pretty efficiently, and we're actually at risk to lose employees if we didn't allow for greater flexibility. So that was one of the reasons. Another reason is when we were trying to hire for the receptionist, we decided to change the position a little bit. That was a year ago, to include some HR responsibilities for that individual. And by doing so, we've alleviated the strain on the HR upstairs on those two individuals. So,
Tom, that was the exact same question that the committee had when we were looking through this.
That's what I say, I actually asked that question in
Yeah.
committee, and they assured us on the call that it was a mutual
Okay.
agreement to reduce hours, and that that reduction wasn't going to cause us to have vacancy.
Excellent.
okay, and then a couple other factors. So there are two different NHRS rates for employee and then teacher rate. For whatever reason, the Director of Student Services is listed as a teacher. All other employees are listed as employees. We had this conversation about a year ago when our business administrator, whether or not that person maintained a certification, changed the NHRS category. So anyway, the state issues the new rates. So the rates are going from 13.53% down to 12.75. That's just what we have to pay. And then there's a slight reduction as well in the teacher rate.
Well, so if the Director of Student Services is at the teacher rate currently, correct?
And if
Because
you recall,
because of those certifications.
No, but if that person,
yes. So if you could recall, a few years ago, we switched the position to assistant superintendent of student services. So that came with a reduction in NHRS fees. Obviously, you need to hold the superintendent certification. Our current director of student services will be completing her CAGs at the end of this fiscal year and would be eligible with her superintendent certification to shift that title. That's further discussion amongst this board, but to make it assistant superintendent with a lower NHRS and then greater flexibility with meetings.
so this budget does not assume that that change has occurred.
No.
That would be a potential savings above and beyond this budget.
Correct, but usually it comes with a salary change. So it might end up being a wash.
A title change alone?
If you're gonna be responsible for more than
Okay,
replace the salary
I guess
adjustment,
I'm leaning back on past experiences.
Right. Moving on, health insurance. So we had to put in an estimate, a placeholder, so we had 8%. At about 4 o'clock today, we got the actual rate. And it's not a GMR, that went away. There's no guaranteed maximum, and we'll find out later. We got the actual rate. So we have 3 different rates based on which plan you're on. The vast majority of our employees are on the SOS plan, and that's at 8.9%. So just a little bit above what we have in the budget. Districts we've heard of at 26% this year, so we're actually pleasantly surprised by that. Our more expensive plans came in at 4.3% and 5.6%.
Wow.
So that was a little bit shockingly good news.
Surprise, yeah.
At the end of the day.
Last year was
So
18.
but like I said, most of our employees are at that 8.9% more cost-effective plan overall.
Is the rate uniform across the SAU and all districts?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, and then dental insurance, we're budgeting at 2%. We don't have that yet. We don't know who we're hiring for assistant superintendent, so there's a placeholder of a 2-person insurance plan. If it goes family, obviously it's going to be more expensive. If it goes single, it'd be less expensive. All right.
I'm sorry, just to go at, when does that new rate go into effect?
July 1.
So that'll be
Next
for
fiscal.
FY '26.
Yeah. Okay. You're going to see a couple of shifts, so we've kind of pulled them out to point your attention to them. There's our director of technology has had in her contract certain professional development opportunities that have been funded either between the districts and or through grant funds, and so we're pulling the remainder of that into the SAU budget since it is an SAU position. So there's just a shift of $750 into the SAU budget. And then there's just a plus minus that adds up to 0 of $400 computer repairs. We're not really seeing a repair So we're putting that into the new computer line. So some of this is for discussion later on. We are always looking at what are salaries of our folks if we were to go out, if we were to lose a position, what is the going rate. So we're looking for a salary adjustment for the HR director of $2,000 and a salary adjustment for our facilities director of $2,000 to be more in line with the market. There are additional additions down here, which we're going to talk about sort of proactively. If there are some things that we want to make a change, we'll discuss them now so that we can appropriately budget for them. They're pretty specific and they're about compensation, so it'll be discussed in non-public later.
A question about the those adjustments. Do you
Time's up.
generally
I watched Buzz when his phone rang. I was like, oh no, it's an emergency.
do you assume that those are added after CPI type increases or before?
That's how they're budgeted.
So you make the CPI adjustment to the current salary and then you budget it. Are these proposals in the budget?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And we
Yeah,
can-
that's why she has lines next to them. That'll tell you what line in the budget they are.
I know it would apply to. I didn't know if it applied in. So
Got you.
Okay, and then here we have, oh my God, I knew it was Here we have just a proposed $5,000 of use of the fund balance in this particular budget, and then we would end right around the 13%. So still above our desired, but
do you
Okay.
know? Do you know what that $5,000 constitutes?
yes.
Additional replacement computer
Okay.
equipment.
That was computer.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on through the lines. You want to open up that other document, so this goes line by line. So when you see, this was what was actually, so we have adopted and then approved. So the adopted budget versus what you guys decided last May. So there's sometimes it's the same and sometimes it's not. So you see that this is the savings in salary right over here with the change in superintendent. You see changes from contractual obligations, and that's just based on what's in the contract. The dues item goes down because it's 100% directly related to the salary. It's just a percentage of the salary for the dues. In the assistant superintendent area, we're keeping everything exactly the same other than the placeholder for the salary. Certainly we're going to know more as we complete a search and find someone. Governing board, nothing changes there. That's not the governing board secretary here, that would be our recording secretary.
I was gonna say, wow, fun.
To cover those conference